Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. My name is Brian Kelly, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's briefing. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. On Mondays, we have a tradition to welcome a new member, and today we're welcoming Root Canal Specialty Associates located in Livonia. So welcome to their president, Martha Zinderman, and her team. And we're welcoming them on behalf of our sponsor, SBAM Energy Solutions. We can help you with free energy efficiency assessments for your small business. So you can learn more at sbam.org. All right, so we learned recently, Brian, that those people who draw Social Security are about to get a raise. What's that about, and why does it matter to small businesses?
We haven't seen an inflationary increase to the Social Security payments at this level in a very, very long time. It'll be 8.7%, and so that's a pretty big increase, obviously tied to the inflationary experience across the U.S. And while, of course, the inflation numbers call for that, the Social Security Trust Fund is not in particularly good shape to provide an increase like that. And you can really see how it does these pieces start to come together. On the one hand, we keep on hearing that government has all this extra money, and there is more tax revenue that has been coming in, but inflation hits government as well. And in terms of increased costs and paying out more in Social Security is one of those areas. So what does the government need to do in order to make up for that, or to keep the books balanced? Not that they're ever actually balanced, but to keep it kind of within a range. And all of a sudden, it starts to make sense. A few of these things that we've seen in recent months, things like the drive toward expanding the number of agents that do audits for the IRS, and in terms of expanding their workforce by about 87,000 people, and of course that was when they looked at the budget in terms of what they expected the revenues to be. They were planning on collecting a lot more money through the IRS, not by new laws being passed, but by having stepped up enforcement. And then just last week, we heard from the Department of Labor on a significant tightening of the rules around the use of independent contractors, which has ramifications on the Social Security system and payroll taxes, and so it really does kind of come together. And I'm not saying there's necessarily a direct line between these things, but it does kind of make sense that the federal government is all of a sudden so aggressive on tax collections and tightening down the use of independent contractors when they're trying to potentially make up some deficits or gaps. But that doesn't mean that we're going to take it lying down. In fact, the Department of Labor rules we view as much more problematic than simply resulting in more taxes, but rather a stifling of small business growth that we've seen. Really one of the few bright spots in the last couple of years since the pandemic has been this explosion in entrepreneurship. Most of those new businesses formed, at least here in Michigan, most of those new businesses formed are actually sole proprietors, people that are working in the gig economy and decided they just want to be their own boss and work as 1099 contractors or independent contractors. So this is something that has really shot right up to the top of our list.
All right, let's break this down a little bit more. You've put together a really useful document. We shared it with our members in today's e-newsletter. So I'm going to pull it up on the screen, and then you can kind of walk through, what we're looking at here.
Yeah, great. So what we have is essentially a new expansive 6-part test. And that expansive 6-part test is much more restrictive on who can be a an independent contractor, far more than what we've experienced, especially in recent years. And what I spent some time on over the weekend, I don't know how many hours over the weekend I spent so that you all didn't have to, but that's what going through this proposed rule to really try to understand what each of these 6 factors really means. So like right now we have from the Trump administration's interpretation of the independent contractor rules, some pretty bright line tests and weighted factors. So they look at certain factors and say, as long as you meet these, you're okay. What these new tests show is they say that you look at the totality, and if you don't, in any of these 6 categories of kind of blanket tests, any one of them could take you out of qualification for independent contractor status. So what I did was I laid out each of these and what the main kind of focus for the government would be in each of these factors, and then what the problem with that is, at least from the small business perspective, if you're on the side of pro entrepreneurship. So opportunity for profit or loss, depending on managerial skill. And they really zero in here on whether or not the worker can negotiate the rate or the pay, or whether that's kind of set by the business or the customer. And the problem is when they look really narrowly at just payment rates and then kind of discounts or diminishes the impact of other factors, it really restricts the number of people that can operate as independent contractors. So they might determine their own work hours, the frequency of their work, how many clients they take on, all these things that are within their control. And if the rate that they are getting paid for their services is not negotiable according to whatever standards the government sets up, then they could lose that independent contractor's status, and therefore be kind of forced to pigeonholed into employee status. This is problematic because it's a voluntary transaction where it wouldn't be unusual for business to say, here's what I can pay, and independent contractor options, who's willing to do the work for that amount. Not everything, the fact that there's not necessarily a negotiation, it just seems like a very narrow thing for them to focus on in terms of status as an independent contractor. Another one where they really muddied the waters is number 2, which is investments by the worker. And so like under the current rules, like a worker could bring certain kind of tools or equipment to the table. And to the extent they were doing that, there was like that counted on the side of being an independent contractor if the employer did not furnish the tools or the equipment for the job. And what this more narrow interpretation and more subjective interpretation says, no. The investments by the employee must be entrepreneurial in nature. And so what they're getting at there is they're saying that if the tools or the equipment was purchased specifically for this job, they're not entrepreneurial in nature. That's an employee. And so what they're saying is that if the tools or equipment was purchased without any particular job in mind, then it is entrepreneurial in nature. But this would indicate yet again that they don't really know how small businesses operate. I mean, it wouldn't be unusual for a small business to invest in equipment or tools after they get the contract because it'd be too risky to do it before they get the contract. Number 3 in the 6-part test, the degree of permanence of the working relationship. This one is pretty frustrating because it basically it says if the working relationship is continuous or kind of indefinite in its duration, then it must be an employee, and also if the work is exclusive to just one contractor, that's also an employee, and if it's not exclusive, it can be an independent contractor. Again, thinking now from the perspective of a small business that hires independent contractors. Well, small businesses don't necessarily have enough work to hire multiple independent contractors. So by nature of the fact that many small businesses have a scale or a scope of operation such they might, for any given function, only need one independent contractor, well, that's exclusive to one independent contractor. But under these rules, that would count against the case for making them an independent contractor, the utilization of independent contractors. So the idea that that they would look at this kind of exclusivity in the small business sense is way off the mark, because it wouldn't be unusual for a small business to just need one, and by its nature, one independent contractor. Well, that would be exclusive, wouldn't it? And then to make matters worse, though, where they say even if there is a lack of permanence to the work, that if that lack of permanence to the work that an independent contractor is doing is intrinsic to the business industry rather than the worker's own initiative, well, then they're not an independent contractor. So this is the one where this part of the rule contradicts itself. So if there's permanence to the work arrangement, you can't be an independent contractor. But also, if the nature of the work is that it's not permanent, based on the choice of the business rather than the independent contractor, well, then it's also not qualified to be an independent contractor. I mean, it's just this part of the rule in particular, look at it and say, yep, that sounds like a government bureaucracy that has never had to run a business before, that would write a rule or a test like that. The fourth one, looking at the nature and degree of control, they look at these factors in terms of which factors of the work relationship are under control of the business and which are under the control of the independent contractor. And this one is more classic, okay, less problematic than some of the other all of the other factors on the list. The problem still is that it's so broad that it's not really clear that, like, I could see how even this one could be very narrowly defined, where they say, okay, you got all of these factors. If an independent contractor even doesn't meet one of these multiple factors, maybe they set their own work schedule and they supervise their performance, but they agreed to an exclusive relationship for that line of work where they're not going to deal with any competitors. Well, now they don't meet this test anymore. So this one seems more classic in its nature, but again, it's written so broadly that you could see how if they were to say, no, all of these items in this category have to be met for it to be an independent contractor, then you really would, this one that seems like it was probably the least problematic could actually cause some trouble too. Now, number 5 and number 6 are the two, honestly, that bother me the most when I look at these, and that is because they look at number 5. It's the extent to which the work performed by the independent contractor is an integral part of the employer's business. And so, first of all, is the federal government then to decide what work is critical or integral to the business and what's non-critical? I mean, this, if it sounds kind of familiar, it actually reminds me of the COVID-19 lockdowns, or the essential versus non-essential and who can do what. Here you got a government bureaucracy that is saying, well, you can't be an independent contractor if the work performed by the independent contractor is integral or critical to the business. So number 1, the government shouldn't decide what's integral or critical to the business, not even a position to decide that. But also, why should small businesses operating as independent contractors be disallowed from doing work that is critical or integral to the business of their customers? And that is, that's another one where it's just, when you apply it to a small business setting, like small businesses who use independent contractors, would only use them for critical or necessary things. Not like small businesses are hiring independent contractors for things that are unnecessary to their business. And so this one, again, if you read it really just as it's written, you can see how this would wipe out so many independent contractors. And not just that, it would wipe out the independent contractors who are most important to small businesses using independent contractors. And then the final one is skill and initiative. And this one, it forces employee status on independent contractors where the worker does not use specialized skills in performing the work. And that, again, it's the government deciding, what's specialized enough in terms of skills to qualify. Like, it's such a subjective standard. And so that's one problem. Yet another subjective standard in these rules where the government is making a judgment call. Well, this independent contractor skills are specialized enough to be an independent contractor. This one is not specialized enough to be an independent contractor. I mean, that type of mentality in the first place is obviously problematic, but it also raises a much more fundamental question, which is, why should workers without like specialized skills be disallowed from being their own bosses? If you have somebody that doesn't have any kind of specialized skill, but they want to be their own boss and they want to sell their services to multiple businesses, and it's for some kind of general labor, why should they not be able to be their own boss, just like somebody with specialized skills would be able to be their own boss? So this is, as you see through these lists, it's not like the current rules where they say, you know what, here are the main tests. If you pass these tests, you're okay. There's a few other kind of minor factors that could also qualify you as an independent contractor. This one says we've got 6, and you got to meet all 6. They look at the totality of it, and any one of these that doesn't meet the government standards could take you out of independent contractor status. So I want to encourage you to visit the website and take a look at all that information. On there is a link to the actual proposed rule, but here's the most important part. There is also a public comment section, and I didn't expect that was going to be open so soon, but it is already open, and it will be open until November 28th. We will have a push throughout the rest of this month and next month to get as many comments as possible into the Department of Labor. If you follow the link that has been added into the comments, you will see in there that it lays out all the information that I just laid out plus more, and then the link to the Federal Register where you can put in your comments. I know you probably wonder, like, oh, if I take the time to do this, does it make any difference at all? Yes, it does. When we had well over 1,000 comments when the Department of Labor tried to issue a rule saying businesses couldn't hire or maintain employment of employees that didn't meet a certain vaccination status. When we issued a call to action, we had it seems like it was 1,200 or 1,400 comments, far more than any other business organization in the state. And at the end of the day, I mean, it went through the court too, but we prevailed in court, and the Department of Labor decided not to proceed with a new rule, which they could have. They could have come back and tried with a new rule. They could have done a new permanent rule at the waiting period. They didn't, and I do believe that the kind of deafening feedback that they received, and just the girth of it coming through, made a difference. So please do take a look at the information, and even if you look at it and say, well, I don't really use independent contractors, I would encourage you to still participate. You might want to use independent contractors in the future, or small businesses. Anyone on their own is can only do so much, but when we all stand together, it can really make a huge difference. So please consider submitting public comments, and you can find it right through the website that Sarah shared.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that you see the second link, which takes you to a different section on the website with some sample language. So if you want to just copy and paste what we've provided, or maybe even add a little bit of your own flair, of course, that's acceptable, but we do try to make it as easy as possible for you to take action. So if you have any questions, you can always reach back out to us. All right, Brian, so let's talk about politics. We're getting really close to Election Day. Anything new that we need to discuss today?
Well, coming off the debate of last week, does seem to be kind of renewed energy behind the two different campaigns. Tudor Dixon had a Governor Dulcian from Arizona that was campaigning with her, and Governor Whitmer was hitting the road as well. Vice President Harris was in town over the weekend, and we just saw an announcement that that President Obama will be in closer to Election Day. And what this all and then there's also been some polling that shows things kind of narrowing, and I'm not really surprised by that there's kind of narrowing as you get through, because you've seen Governor Whitmer has been around 50% in the polls, and Dixon's numbers have been kind of jumping all around, but between the high 30s and upper 40s. But I think that most people presumed that undecided voters that kind of tend Republican would eventually kind of come home to the Republican side, and so you'd see it kind of naturally narrow together. And I think that's happening right now. You see the system responding to that. That's why you see the Republican Governors Association that's spending some real dollars on TV, which we hadn't seen before. That's why you see big names like the Vice President and former President Obama coming in to campaign. And I wouldn't be surprised if you saw more visitors coming down the stretch as well. So look for the volume to go up. I think the candidates will zero in now mainly on economic issues as they come down the stretch, because there's those swing voters in the middle usually do respond to economic issues more than anything. So and here's the other thing too. I know everybody hates negative ads. Get ready, because when things get close, the ads get more negative. And so I think that you probably should expect to kind of brace yourself for that. Over the next, it may seem like it's already been negative, but it's going to be, it can always be more. And so I think it's going to feel like a closer race coming down the stretch. And then when talking about the statewide races, but then with respect to the legislative races, still looks like kind of advantaged Republicans in the House, and probably a coin flip in the Senate. Really, really close. I think whichever party holds the majority in that chamber, it'll be just by 1 or 2 votes.
And I'm going to remind everyone that you can access our small business voter guide. I just put the link in the Zoom comments. We can do that on Facebook too. As a reminder, this guide has video messages from both Whitmer and Dixon, as well as responses to candidate questionnaires for both of them, as well as candidates for Attorney General and Secretary of State. And of course, you can also view our endorsements on the website as well. So we've done a lot of the homework for you, and do our best to provide you with good tools to make good, solid decisions. Brian, let's talk about Data Monday.
All right, I'm going to pull up some graphs, and we'll make this pretty quick here. This really caught my attention here. The population trends around the world. You see the United States, not surprisingly, the United States, kind of in a modest growth and then flattening out. But in terms of the countries that have really driven world population over the last couple decades, several decades, you'll see China. The UN estimates show that China has basically hit its peak, and that number might start to actually decline now. And as you look at kind of the birth rates and the age of population and so forth, these estimates really aren't that hard to. Population trends tend to be fairly predictable, because you can just see the general size of each of the generations. And so this is a big change for China to really kind of hit that population arc and start coming down. A lot of their GDP growth in the past has not been based on increases in productivity, although they've had some of that. It's just a law of large numbers. You have a lot of people, and a lot of people, even at low productivity numbers, equals a huge GDP. So, and then, but India trends, it looks like it will continue to grow for quite some time, and so will become the most populous nation in the world. So just a few things to look at there. And then NFIB does their survey of the top concerns of small businesses. This is a nationwide survey, and I like to show this. It shows inflation is still the highest factor, and then the quality of labor coming in here at number 2. So you'll see taxes and the cost of labor actually as lower considerations. So this actually fits our pattern. I actually don't hear small business owners complaining about the cost of labor, even though the cost has gone up pretty substantially. Mainly the concern has been around, hey, people are willing to pay up for high productivity, but getting that high productivity for the cost is where the concern has been. We talked about inflation last week, but just wanted to share what that looks like on a graph. So you see the overall headline inflation coming down to 8.2%, but still higher than what was expected. But underneath that, so that includes everything, including food and energy, but core inflation takes out food and energy, which are very, very volatile. And this is where the big concern was in the numbers last week, is that core inflation, stickier, it's hard to get it to go down, actually went up. So it not only went up, but more than what was expected. And then taking a look here at our next graph, you'll just look at income increases, and so you'll see that that lower wage individuals in the lowest quartile have seen the biggest increases in their wages, and the upper quartile, a smaller increase in wages, but both are less than inflation. So in terms of real wage increase, they're both down. Looking at wages overall, that's what this number would show you in terms of the entire workforce. You see that actually maybe has crested, came down just a little bit, but keep in mind that part of the graph is just between 6 and 7%. So that's a relatively small decrease. And I wanted to finish up with this one, which just shows the buying conditions for vehicles, houses, and large durable goods, all of which are quite a bit lower. You see, when interest rates go up, major purchases go down. This is just a function of how it works. Thought this graph, although it's kind of messy looking because there's a lot of ups and downs on any given, because it's these are as these numbers come out, but and these are assembled by our own very own University of Michigan, by the way. But you see vehicles and houses down more. Large durable durables, so the household durables, actually up a little bit from previous months and quarters, but still pretty low compared to what it was just a little while ago. So I would point to that when I express confidence that even though inflation has been kind of sticky and high, that eventually it is going to pull these the inflation growth rates down, that when they increase the interest rates, that's the type of data that gives me confidence that it will happen. It's just a matter of time.
All right, thank you for that. So a little scheduling note here. We're actually headed to SBAM's Fall Leadership Council Summit at the end of the week. We'll be at Mission Point Resort on Mackinac Island. And so there will be no show this Thursday. So we'll be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock. In the meantime, have a wonderful week. Follow along on social media, visit our website for updates, and stay connected that way. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.